Hey guys, so I thought today it would be less of my face and more me talking about some interesting philosophical concepts that I often don't see as mentioned in sort of mainstream popular philosophy. So the first one I'd like to talk about is eudaimonia. It's a concept central to sort of ancient Greek philosophy, especially in like Aristotle and Aristotelian thought. And it basically means like living a happy, fulfilled, virtuous life. It's about combining the spirit and divinity. So you've had like a good spirit and divine life, and it often ties in with the word telos, which is your journey of life. It's the sort of highest human good, the condition of living a well and actualizing one's potential to live. So you've actualized your mental and physical potential, kind of similar to how Plato sort of thought that the most tragic thing would be if someone was unable to achieve their peak mental and physical aesthetics. It's not sort of a fleeting hedonistic pleasure or satisfaction or some kind of simple look for dopamine. It's more about a long-term, sort of longitudinal existence and living this virtuous, righteous life where you did all the good that you can, but you were also fulfilled in your spirit more and your flesh. You'll have to excuse my dog going absolutely crazy in the background for this one. But the second one is Hegel's absolute or absolutism. This one is really, really hard, dense, complicated. And if you've ever read Hegel, you probably stop about 20 pages in and go like, what the hell is this guy talking about? But it essentially hinges on this idea that the absolute comes to sort of know itself through this dialectal process of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. And that's kind of the thing that drives history and has created history and reality. It's this. It's kind of similar to the Jungian self-knowing primordial self or the self-knowing spirit. Um, it's the thing that sort of separates Hegel's idea from other people's ideas of an absolute is that most time other people's absolutes are static, whilst Hegel's absolute is more flexible and it sort of manifests itself in like religion, ideology, even nature, especially history. He was very into history and obviously philosophy. It's the culmination of an ultimate reality. It's the unity of all oppositions and contradictions, and it's comprehended as a sort of a living, rational whole. If none of that made a whole lot of sense, then welcome to Hegel. Another note on Hegel is he always kind of reminds me slightly of Delander's assemblage theory, which we will discuss more about later. But it's this idea that things in life slowly assemble to make the thing they are. So society didn't just start as the progressive society it is now. It went through many, many, many iterations. It went through many upgrades. It assembled itself into this sort of assemblage that it is now. And that kind of reminds me of Hegel's idea of what reality is. That could be totally off the mark to some sort of well-versed philosophers on Hegel, but that's how I've always sort of seen his theory. The next one is Heidegger's thrownness, which is one of my sort of favorite philosophical concepts, and it always reminds me of the quote, "I am caught in the tangle of these people's lives," because that's really the sort of crux of what Heidegger's saying here, is that you are thrown into life. You're not, you don't ask to be born. You're just thrown into into a world, into a situation, and then you begin to accumulate a past that you had like no say in. Just your mere existence and its linear progression creates this past. And this thrownness sort of means that you are living in the present, in the reality. And an interesting part of thrownness that I don't see often mentioned, but you can also apply thrownness to sort of this vicarious live fulfillment. So, say you see someone on a train, they look interesting, they get on the train and they wander off, and you sort of wonder, where did they go? What are they doing that day? What's their day like? You kind of throw yourself into their living space, into their sort of soul almost. And that's another sort of more niche, obscure idea behind Heidegger's sort of thrownness. One is what I'm sure was a huge inspiration to the movies The Matrix, amongst many other things, but it's Jean Baudrillard's simulacras. And simulacras sound like simulations because that's essentially what they are. They're sort of copies of a copy of a copy. I always like to think of simulacra as like the original voice that echoes and echoes and echoes, slowly becomes more and more just distorted. And these are these simulacras that we live in, the sort of dissolved structure. It's sort of like the better the copy that we live in and the more faithful it is to this reflection of reality. But it is always a distorted version of reality, an absence of reality. It can be quite a convincing illusion we live in, but it is nonetheless an illusion. And then he gets into these things called hyper reality, where we're really trying to convince ourselves that we exist through things, and then sort of a hypertalia. So hypertalia is when essentially something surpasses its original goal or its original original source, and it becomes such a distorted copy that it ends up sort of dissolving itself. It sort of martyrs itself through its own echo. It's quite poetic, and it's kind of reminiscent of like martyrdom in general, really. But it's a big part of postmodernist thinking, and it's this sort of like ushering in this new age of dissolving classical structures within society and dissolving sort of classical values and modernity, which was like coined by people like Emile Durkheim and stuff like that, and it's this move into the more abstract. So this one is a Deleuzian singularity, which is quite similar to something I previously mentioned called Delander's assemblage theory. And it's essentially, it's the only sort of real differences is that Deleuze thought that these processes that make this singularity existed before the singularity even was ever in a form of inception. So they existed before and beneath individual objects, identities, or personas. A singularity is essentially, it's not just a geometry. A singularity is sort of a function of behavior change. It can be qualitative or quantitative. It's this sort of inflection point. Broke his singularities up as well into sort of two forms. One was a virtual one, which was what could happen, sort of an idealistic idea of what could happen. It's the potentials. It's not cemented in reality yet, but it could be there. And then the actual, which was the second one, is these sort of concrete things, these concrete individual events and forms. Singularities often belong to these virtuals, this virtual category. They are not usually totally in existence yet, but it's sort of more of a prediction of where the assemblage is going to lead. Finally, an interesting theory, although this is sort of less philosophical and more sort of in the realms of like sociology and human geography, but Marc Augé's placelessness. And I'll sum this one up pretty quickly, but Marc Augé sort of said that this sort of mass commercialization and sort of mass commodification of a society and its institutions no longer creates an individual sense of like reality, but we're constantly in like this limbo of placelessness. And an example of this is how like every airport looks pretty much exactly the same, or every supermarket is laid out exactly the same. And you could be in a supermarket in one side of the country and it looks pretty much exactly the same as a supermarket in your hometown. And it's this it's no longer a place. There's nothing that really identifies it or makes it individual. There's no individualistic standard to it. It's just this endless placelessness. And I always find that one quite interesting. It's kind of like a motorway. It's a fun last meta-philosophical theory. It's A.M. Kent's the paradigm on the soul as a top-down ethereal antagonist, where consciousness is a reaction to the observation of an absolute or a godhead or a soul. The soul isn't divine in like it's a white blob that floats in and out of you. It's more of a something that exists outside of space-time, sort of in a sixth or seventh dimension. So to sum it up, consciousness doesn't just arise from the brain in isolation. It's catalyzed by being observed by what the call of the soul of all, a universal top-down antagonist. This force isn't nurturing. It's an existential pressure. It sort of compels matter to become self-aware, creating subjective experience as a response, sort of akin to the observer effect, although I know that was done using devices. But I'm using Wigner's friend sort of iteration of it. I've actually published a paper where I go sort of more into the quantum physics of it and the quantum metaphysics, as smart as that sounds. So our minds leap back, observing the observer, creating sort of this deeper level of awareness and complexity, individuation, our sense of self. This all sort of emerges from resisting or wrestling with this observing force shaped by entropy and tension. So rather than seeing the mind as a byproduct of matter, I sort of see it as a dynamic relationship, matter to reacting to being watched by the universal soul, this top-down ethereal antagonist. So sort of how matter at wavelengths collapsed into matter, this collapse ends up becoming palatable for our brains, causing sentience. It's important to note with this paradigm that there isn't a goal. The goal isn't transcendence or escape. It's just sort of acknowledging the gaze and surrendering entirely to it, because the end goal of this gaze, of this soul, this godhead, this absolute, this singularity, the Jung would sort of refer to it more as like a primordial self, is that it will eventually martyr itself by its own creation that will observe back at it and sort of cause an Ouroboros or a snake eating its own tail effect. But yeah, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe, maybe check out my book, The Martyr of the Soul by A.M. Kent, or The Consciousness Society by A.M. Kent, or much more sort of popular one, Void Around Sunlight by A.M. Kent. All of that would be super appreciated, and I'm sorry the pictures didn't align with the audio. I had to make this on my phone, and that wasn't the easiest of endeavors. But yeah, thank you for checking this out.